Hey everybody,
Hello,
how's it going?
how are you?
Okay, not too bad.
Go.
Um, yeah, just kind of, you know, it's is it unseasonably warm in
Yes,
Knoxville?
it is, and it's going to be unseasonably cold next week, down to 23 at night.
All
Oh,
right,
So all the plants are coming up, and so I have to cover everything.
I
It's
gotcha.
three nights in a row. It's going to be in the 20s at night,
oh.
according to the weather forecast. So,
All
But it's
right,
gonna be good this afternoon till about 5 o'clock, so I got time for a motorcycle ride.
all right. Well,
Who
there you
knows
go.
when I get to do it again, but
All right, well, good. All right, I'm glad that well, at least we know what to expect.
yeah.
That does help. So. All right, well, why don't we get online here? Unless there's a question off the top of people's heads that we want to delve into.
Mhm.
All
No.
right. Let's see. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, it took me a moment to get online today because they changed the Zoom app on my iPad, and it was very difficult to find this meeting.
Oh,
So, I mean, it took me. It wasn't automatic. So, um, all right. So let's see. I think where we were was to talk about right the Mashiv Haruach.
Hmm.
We were talking about that. Um,
And Marita taught in the commentary that we don't do that ordinarily.
right. Okay. Yeah. Let me see. Yeah. Okay. Oh, so what we're talking about here is this other bit where it's like V'ten tal umatar livracha versus V'ten bracha.
Hmm.
Okay, so let me just sort of walk through this again for a moment. Um, again, we've been going through the different sort of middle blessings of the Amidah. That's what we started with at least last time. And so we're going to get into this a little bit more with this prayer for prosperity, right? The blessing of the years, which you know, prosperity, really, truly meant at least for these purposes, um, for those who are farming and to make sure that rain is coming at the right time. So, it says regarding the blessing of the years in the rainy season, one must say in the blessing and give dew and rain, which means v'ten tal umatar, right? Tal refers to dew, and matar is one of the words we have for rain. In the diaspora, we start to ask for rain in the evening prayer of the 60th day after the autumnal equinox. And the day of the equinox is included as day one of the 60-day count. So this is the one time that I can think of it. Maybe I'm missing something else, but the one time that I'm aware of in which the um, in which we start doing something or stop doing something liturgically based on the secular calendar rather than the lunar calendar, because it is specifically a prayer having to do with agriculture. And agriculture is not dependent on the lunar cycle, it's dependent on the solar cycle, it's dependent on the seasons. And so it says that we wait until this time. So I keep on forgetting whether it's December 4th or December 5th. But this is when, instead of in this blessing saying the words v'ten bracha, simply give a blessing, we add v'ten tal umatar livracha, because this is when, because early December, at least in Israel, is when you would have, an extra emphasis in having that kind of moisture in order to get the crops to grow at the right time. Now, or maybe I got that a little bit reversed, but let's see. Let's see what it says here. In the land of Israel, we start to ask for rain from the night of the 7th of Mar Cheshvan, and we continue to ask up until the afternoon prayer of the eve of the first Yom Tov, the major holiday of Passover, and from then onwards we stop asking. So I guess, so the sense here is that in Israel we don't actually, it isn't actually dependent on the equinox, the autumnal equinox. They just do it on whenever the 7th day of Mar Cheshvan happens. Now, what is Mar Cheshvan? Mar Cheshvan is actually the real official name of the Hebrew month that we generally refer to as Cheshvan. And there are different explanations as to why the actual official name is Mar Cheshvan. And the spiritual reason why we often say that it's called Mar Cheshvan is because Mar means bitter. And so the month of Cheshvan is immediately following the month of Tishrei, which takes place usually, sort of September to October, somewhere in that range. And then Cheshvan comes right afterwards. So it is always in the autumn. But they say, okay, well, why would we call it Mar Cheshvan? Well, we call it Mar Cheshvan, according to the rabbis, because without any holidays, that month does not have any holidays, other than Shabbat, that it's bitter for us to not have any holidays, as opposed to the previous month, Tishrei, in which it's almost nonstop holidays, right? The Tishrei has all of these, it has Rosh Hashanah, it has Yom Kippur, it has Sukkot, Simchat Torah, and it's just nonstop. And so by contrast, the month of Cheshvan doesn't have anything. So there are those who say that the official name for Cheshvan is Mar Cheshvan, because it's bitter to, after all the celebration, to not have any celebration other than Shabbat. So now the joke I would make, unfortunately, is that Mar, that prefix, is also one of the ways that in Hebrew, where we refer to somebody as Mr. So-and-so, we say Mar so-and-so. So I like to refer to Cheshvan sometimes as Mr. Cheshvan. I don't know if there's a Mrs. Cheshvan, you'd have to ask him. So anyway, so that's sort of part of the mystery of it. I learned at one point, and I'm sorry to say that I forget why this is there, that there's actually evidence that the name Mar Cheshvan actually has nothing to do with any commentary of the bitterness of not having to celebrate the holiday, that there's actually like some other reason that's actually part of the month's name. But the main reason, but the sort of the prevailing opinion is to say, oh, well, it's Cheshvan, but our nickname for it is Mar Cheshvan because we wish we were still celebrating holidays. So that's the whole long and short of that. So, okay, so this is what this is the overall idea here. Now, this next part, the individuals who need rain in the hot season, the warmer months, I guess, should not ask for it in the blessing of the years, but rather in the blessing of Shomea Tefillah, who hears prayers. Now, Shomea Tefillah is essentially the end of the section of the Amidah that refers to requests. So, in other words, this teaching says you don't ask for rain in the middle of that section, you wait until the end of the section. I don't know of any place in which they actually do that today, in which they actually switch it to a different part of the Amidah. At least I haven't seen it. And even a large city, such as Nineveh, or one whole land, such as Sfarad, meaning Spain in its entirety, or Ashkenaz, which is the word often used for Germany, at least in these writings, in its entirety, they are considered as individuals and should ask for rain and dew in the prayer Shomea Tefillah, in that prayer at the end of the request section. However, if someone is in one whole land where they require rain in the hot season, erred regarding it, and asked for rain in the blessing of years, if one desires, one goes back and prays according to the rules of voluntary prayer without the request for rain in the blessing of years, but one is not obligated to go back at all. Again, I have not seen this custom or this directive in action. I'm not saying that it doesn't exist. I'm not saying that it's not a part of things, but I have not actually seen anybody, switch it around. The Sidurim that we have, and this is just sort of a general idea. The Sidurim that we have are books that they try to make it so that you don't have to think through what to say and when. They want to make it as clear and evident as possible, as long as you know what day it is on the Hebrew calendar, unless assuming you know what day of the week it is, whether it's Shabbat or not, whether it's a holiday or not. A prayer book is generally going to just take any other bit of thinking out of it so that you can just go ahead and pray the service the right way. So I haven't seen, there hasn't been, so every once in a while in a prayer book, you're going to see like an introduction to a prayer where it says, or to a passage where it said, some communities don't say this. Have you ever seen this? Or some communities include this, some communities don't include this, whatever the case. That doesn't seem to be the case with this. So I have a sense that we don't worry about this anymore. Okay. Any questions or comments on this? All right. Not the most, I don't know. This one is maybe not the most exciting. I'm actually gonna, if it's okay with you, I think I'm gonna move on to this because I wanna.
What is just written? Because it, we go into different classes, but I'm wondering when was this written that they knew about Germany? And I'm thinking that, well, they got the surrounding empires and stuff, but all of a sudden now we're talking about Germany. So
this is 16th century. And Germany as a nation state did not exist, I believe, not until 1870, if I have that right.
You
Um,
have that right.
yeah. So, but there were my sense is that, but for hundreds of years before that, there were certain lands that were known as, Germanic lands. I mean, lands in which the residents spoke German. It just wasn't consolidated into um,
But
one.
Israel knew about this.
Right, right.
They're still talking about Israel through the time of one of the temples or something, or
I'm sorry, I
are
don't
we
quite.
talking about Israel? This is during the time of one of the temples. This is going on, or is this a lot more recent than where we usually are in the classes?
Yeah, no, this is a lot more recent than Temple times. So just to kind of give you a sense of it. So as opposed to like when we, Psalms, like when you're, the Psalms class, I mean, the Psalms were put together during Temple times. Or I mean, there's a sense that it's pretty much like during the times in which a temple stood, maybe a few at a times in between the two temples, but you're definitely talking about more of an ancient document. This is not an ancient document. This is a document of late Middle Ages, depending on how you attribute that specific time. So, yeah, so that is certainly different. Um, but yeah, but that's good clarity here. Okay. Now we have this about the conclusion of the Hashiva blessing. Hashiva Shoftenu, which is one of the prayers in the request in which it says, restore our judges. Essentially, in the request section of the weekday Amidah, you basically start working toward an idea of sorts of redemption. There are several prayers that kind of work our way up to a time in which there is a promise of redemption, whether we understand that as being a Messiah in the flesh or simply a time of peace in Israel. However we understand that, there are several prayers that say, we want certain things to happen as in days of old. And so one of the things it says is restore our judges. In other words, uh, give us a give us a time, God, in which we are able to self-govern, not just politically, but in terms of judgments. I mean, there was a long time, and certainly in temple times, where you had what's called the Sanhedrin, in which there was, you'd have groups of very, well thought of legal minds who would rule on cases of dispute or other things that Jews would be dealing with. So anyway, that's what the Hashiva Shoftenu blessings is about. So the blessing, this says, Hashiva Shoftenu, one concludes it with the words, Melech Ohev Tzedakah Umishpat, which means sovereign, lover of righteousness and justice. In other words, the end of that passage says, Baruch Atah Adonai, blessed are you Adonai, sovereign, lover of righteousness and justice. Okay. And between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, one instead concludes with the words Hamelech HaMishpat, which means the sovereign of justice. Talk about that in a moment, but let me just go through the gloss. However, if one said Melech Ohev Tzedakah Umishpat during the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, one does not have to go back. And they only said that one needs to go back in a place where they say Ha'el Ohev Tzedakah Mishpat, the God lover of righteousness and justice during the entire year. Okay. So why change that prayer, the end of that prayer during the high holidays? It is done to put ourselves in line with the themes present throughout the high holiday liturgy. There are at least a couple different points where, especially on Rosh Hashanah, in which God being recognized as sovereign, as Hamelech, is very much an important point in the service. You may be aware that when the leader of prayer begins Shacharit, begins the morning service of Rosh Hashanah, they do it in a different way than than we do, let's say, on Shabbat, on a typical Shabbat. On Shabbat, we have this point where we lead into Shacharit by going Shochen Ad Marom V'Kadosh Shemo. But the passage just before that ends with the phrase Hamelech Yoshev Al Kisei Ram V'Nisa, which is the sovereign, the king, who sits on a throne of what's the best translation of this? Of I think grandeur and honor, something like that. I could be a little off, but something really nice. Put it that way, a really nice throne. And so that phrase on Shabbat isn't necessarily emphasized. On Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the leader in prayer, usually somebody musically inclined, hopefully, is going Hamelech Yoshev al Kisei Ram V'Nisa. People do it differently than how I do it, but the idea is like you're really trying to emphasize Hamelech, right? The sovereign. Because what are we praying for on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? What are we praying for during those two holidays and the time in between? What are we praying for?
A good outcome.
A good outcome, specifically with what, though?
So, as far as our sins are concerned.
Right. We want our sins we want and need our sins to be forgiven, and we want to be written in the book of life.
Yes.
Right. So the idea is that, I recognize this will sound morbid because it kind of is, in the sense that, like, we are approaching things with the notion of our lives are in the hands of the sovereign. And so because of this, one of the ways we approach it is we keep on going back to this idea of Hamelech, the ruler. In other words, because imagine that you're going to a human ruler or just anyone in a position of authority, and you need something from them desperately. You're going to say, you're going to emphasize the honorific, right? When you talk to a judge in a courtroom, right? You don't go up to them and say, "Hey, Mr. Judge, and you certainly don't call them by their first names, right? It's your honor, right? When you formally introduce a member of Congress, a senator, we refer to them as the Honorable so-and-so. I recognize that sometimes that is questionable, but that's a whole other topic. In all seriousness, though, when we are dealing with somebody who is, who has a certain level of power and has a certain amount of power over us, if you will, when that power is, when we're dependent on them, I mean, we're going to, the least we can do is speak to them with as much respect as possible. So Hamelech becomes an important word. So it follows that, going back to this particular blessing that you have on a weekday morning, or just a weekday in general, Melech Ohev Tzedakah Umishpat, lover of righteousness and justice. When we are between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we're saying, no, Hamelech HaMishpat. Remember, God, you are the sovereign of justice, and we need justice when it comes to, I need justice in terms of being able to preserve my life. So we changed the phrasing to fit in with the time of year. Now, you could say, well, wait a second, why don't we do that for all the prayers in the request section, right? When we pray on behalf of people who are sick, Refa'enu Adonai v'nei Rafeh, we talked about this last time, this particular prayer, right? Why don't we say, Hamelech HaRofeh, the one who, why don't we just say, the sovereign that that heals the sick? Why don't we throw that in? I'm not sure, but I think this just goes to the fact that there is very much a sense of we are very much in a sort of on a justice kick, if you will, during the high holidays. Perhaps the one of the most famous books about the high holidays is called Justice and Mercy. So we are saying, okay, listen, if we want judges in Israel to be there for us, to be present for us, well, how much more so do we need to say something similar for the ultimate judge? Everybody follow?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that's something that we do there. Because, yeah, I mean, all right. So I think that, all right, now, we have alluded to this next part a little bit, but now we're going to get into it a little more. And there have been questions about this, understandably. The laws of the one who wants to add personal prayers in the blessings, right? The Amidah is famously plural, just as most prayers are in the plural. What if we have something specific we want to say about what's going on in our individual lives? Where and how can you do it? So here is at least what they have to say about it. If one wanted to add in any of the middle blessings something similar to the blessing, one may add. How so? If one had a sick person, or you knew a sick person, one asks for mercy for that person in the blessing of Rifa'enu, in the heal us blessing, right? And we, by the way, a lot of our typical prayer books have that listed as an option. That if we want to specifically talk about an individual during the Amidah, if you want to talk about a specific individual in need of healing, that's where we throw it in. If one needs a livelihood, one may ask for it in the blessing of the years. Okay, so in other words, if you need if you are wanting to pray for a job, a more stable job, money, some extra money, that's where you can throw it in. And in the blessing of Shomea Tefillah, right, the blessing at the end of the request section, which says who hears prayers, one may ask for any of one's needs, for it includes all the requests. So whenever it says, whenever have Shomea Tefillah, when you see that phrase, it basically it refers to pretty much, it's kind of a catch-all. So, in other words, it can be, so sometimes people wonder, it's like, okay, wait a second. So, am I allowed to stray from the words of the text of the Siddur? Well, ideally, you're not supposed to stray from it, but you can add to them. Okay?
Is this out loud or just silently when you're adding personal stuff?
Yeah, my understanding is that it's silently, because when you're talking about we're saying these things out loud, right? I mean, who's saying them out loud? Usually it's the prayer leader. A prayer leader is not a prayer leader is especially in a circumstance where they're repeating the Amidah, they're not going to start talking about his or her personal needs when praying in front of the community. I would imagine not, right? I mean, you're not going to, like, okay, if the prayer leader is praying the Amidah out loud, presuming that they already also have a chance to say it individually, when they're saying it out loud, they're not going to just start saying, oh, make sure to watch over Uncle Charlie during his surgery. I could use a new Cadillac. I mean, I know I'm being a little, silly with that, but I mean, but that's, you're not going to have that person say it out loud. So it really refers to individual prayer. So the gloss that's added here is when one adds, one should begin the blessing, and after that add, but one should not add and then begin the blessing. Meaning you can put your individual prayer within the body of the paragraph of the prayer that's already written, but you're not supposed to simply write down, you're not supposed to simply you don't start with your individual prayers and then go into the text from there. You have to start and end with what's written in the Siddur. In the middle, if you need to add some stuff, fine. Does that make sense? Okay. So then, according to Rabbeinu Yonah, when one adds to the blessing something similar to that blessing, if one is adding it on behalf of all Israel, one says it in plural language and not singular language. And one should only add at the end of the blessing and not the middle. All right. So if you are, let's say, okay, so let's say you were in the section for health, right? The Rifa'inu. If if we wanted to, let's say, add a, prayer for recovery for anyone injured in, due to military attacks, due to being in combat, whatever it might be. If you're saying it as a general prayer, you got to do it. You have to say it in the plural. Um, which I think should be fairly understandable. Okay. Now, and if one is asking specifically for one's own needs, for example, there's a sick person in one's home, or one needs a livelihood, one can ask even in the middle of the blessing, as long as one does so in singular language and not plural language. In other words, if you have to ask about yourself or about someone specific, make sure that that's clear. All right. Let's see. Why is this not moving? Okay. All right. Here we go. And in the blessing of Shomea Tefillah, right, the one who hears prayer at the end of the request section, and similarly at the end of prayer, either right before Yehulu Ratzon, we'll talk about that in a second, or after it, one may ask in either singular language or plural language whether it is specifically for one's own needs or for of the public. All right, what is this Yehulu Ratzon? We've talked at some point about when the Amidah, like the technical end of the Amidah, is the prayer for peace. Baruch atah Adonai hamvarech et amo Yisrael bashalom. Right? Blessed are you, Adonai, who blesses God's, blesses the people of Israel with peace. That's technically the end of the Amidah. Now, if you look at the Amidah in a prayer book, there's usually a whole other page or half a page or something else that is really just meant for individual recitation. In other words, the prayer leader is not saying this out loud. And there is a bunch of, and there are a lot of things that are kind of meant for our individual needs. And the next to last line is Yehulu Ratzon, which is a line that begins with Yehulu Ratzon, which means may it be acceptable before you. So what we're referring to is that paragraph that we find at the end of the Amidah, in the Siddur, which is really a postscript to the Amidah itself, to be quite technical about it. It's really just an add-on to begin with.
And it's in the singular, it's not in the plural. The example.
Yes. Yeah. So if you and that's evident in the first word, the first word that we usually see is Elohai, which means my God, as opposed to saying Eloheinu, which is our God. So that's where we know the shift has taken place. So we do have a little bit of leeway, right? We are able to add our own prayers, as long as the prayers of the community have the highest priority. But can you customize? You can customize. And in this ultimate age of customization, I'm sure that is a welcome relief. Because goodness knows we can customize everything these days. Okay. Now, there's one authority, who apparently shall go nameless, There's one authority who says that when one adds to a blessing for one's individual needs, one should not make it lengthy. In other words, yeah, you need to say some, you need to add some things. Great. Just don't go, don't go crazy with it. Is essentially what this is. Not a surprise. Not a surprise that they would say that. Now, if one skipped something or erred in the middle of the middle blessings, one only needs to go back to the beginning of the blessing in which one made the mistake in or skipped something. And from that point onwards, one goes back in the order of the rest of the Amidah. So let's say you goofed, you said something wrong in the middle blessings. And remember, there are a bunch of middle blessings. 13, I think. You can just go back to the blessing that in which you made the mistake. You don't have to start the whole unit over, and you certainly don't have to start the entire Amidah over. Because each individual request in the request section really is its own thing. So now we're talking about the prayer leader here. A prayer leader who finished the blessing of Goel Yisrael and did not say Anenu, answer us, on a fast day, does not go back, even if one had still not finished the immediate next blessing of Rifa'enu, heal us. And if one did go back, it is an empty blessing. Rather, one should say Anenu in the blessing of Shomea Tefillah, as an individual does. So Anenu refers to an extra section that is added on a public fast day, of which there are several. We just had one right before Purim. And for some people, although I don't know a lot of people who actually wind up fasting, but the custom is that if you are a firstborn on the day before, on the day leading up to the first Seder, the first day of Passover, then you should fast, because it is a recognition of the idea that on the first night of Passover, that was the night, according to the Torah, in which that was the specific night in which the firstborn of Egypt were killed, and that the firstborn of Israel, escaped, escaped their death by putting the blood on their doorposts. Sorry, was there a question? Sorry, I thought I heard something. It's okay. Okay. So anyway, so on the occasions in which you have a public fast day, this refers to Anenu. Now, by the way, why am I saying a public fast day as opposed to a private fast day? What does a private fast day mean? A private fast day, essentially refers to somebody who, decides on a particular day, I need to fast today. Now, why would somebody do that? Other than potentially health reasons, but it's not a health-related thing. There are different reasons why individuals might choose to fast on their own on a particular day. There are those who say that if they have gone into a streak of, I was going to say a streak of bad luck, but I don't want to make it sound like it's just something as, fluky or something like that. But if they feel, but people have different reasons to feel compelled to choose to fast, even when it's not, when nobody else is. The reason that comes to mind about why a fast why somebody might choose as an individual to fast on a particular day, is actually because there's a custom that you can choose to do that if you woke up from a bad dream. That if you had a bad dream, you can, and if you're kind of spooked by it, which, by the way, I mean, I think that happens to a lot of us, where we have, where we have a particularly bad dream, and it just, you wake up and you remember it, or at least parts of it, and you just are kind of, messes with your day, messes with your head. There are those who actually fast on that day as an individual. In other words, without any expectation that anybody else is going to join you. So that's the difference between a public fast and a private fast. A private fast is something where you as an individual decide, you know what, I feel like I need to refrain from eating today and to take some time to nourish the spirit. So a couple of other examples of this. One example is, I don't know of a lot of communities that do this, but have any of you heard of Yom Kippur Katan?
Yes.
What is your understanding of Yom Kippur Katan?
It's later on. Is it during Sukkot? It's later on when somebody can't do the fasting on Yom Kippur. They do it at a later date. Is that?
I haven't heard that. Now, that's not to say that that's not the case, but I haven't heard that. We have that with like Pesach Sheni, right?
Yes,
That it's,
maybe that's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah. So Yom Kippur, no, it's a good thought there. So Yom Kippur Katan refers to there are some people who, and like particularly, I guess, pious people, for lack of a better term, particularly pious people would establish the practice of when you'd have a 2-day Rosh Chodesh. In other words, when the end of the previous month and the beginning of the new month, in which both days are considered Rosh Chodesh, partially because like we're just not entirely sure whether the moon is entirely new on those particular days, so we just say both days are Rosh Chodesh. There are those who will take the first day of that Rosh Chodesh, or sometimes the day before Rosh Chodesh, and call it Yom Kippur Katan, and make it a day of sort of like a mini day of repentance, if you will. Why would somebody do that? First of all, it should be emphasized that Yom Kippur Katan would, if you take on any individual fast, it's assumed that it's a minor fast. It's not the 24-hour fast that Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av are. So it would be a sun up, it would be a sun up to sundown fast. As to why someone would elect to do that, I think it was a practice established for those who would say, understandably so, saying we're sorry for our wrongdoing one day a year feels like not enough sometimes, right? Or even during the 10 days from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur. Sometimes that might feel like, all right, I'm glad we're emphasizing it now, but, shouldn't we be doing this? Shouldn't we be asking for forgiveness at other times? Shouldn't we be, or at the very least, shouldn't we evaluate our behavior more than just once a year, right? I'm not saying every day should be Yom Kippur, goodness knows, but it's not a bad idea to check in with ourselves from time to time, right? So some people establish this custom of fasting pretty much, doing a minor fast every month. Another custom that I have seen, and I've actually engaged in from time to time, and I don't know how I quite feel about it, but they turn Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, into a minor fast day. And I think that one, for me, feels pretty justifiable. At least as for me, right? I mean, I'm not here to say that it is necessarily what everyone should do. I'm mainly speaking of what what I would feel perhaps more comfortable doing.
Wait, why?
Why fast on
Because 6 million people were murdered. I mean,
yeah.
I don't. All right.
Yeah.
It seems.
I mean, yeah.
I don't know.
What are your
It
thoughts?
just seems odd to be fasting on the occasion of 6 billion starving people being murdered. It just seems. I mean, I don't get it.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And by the way, again, this is far from a universal custom, right?
Yeah.
And
I mean, what's the logic here?
well, so the logic is that look, we have minor fasts. Let's think about the minor fasts that we have, right? Tzom Gedalia. Tzom Gedalia was a fast commemorating the assassination of, frankly, like the last king of Israel that had any real power in the second book of Kings.
Okay.
Right?
Mm.
There is the fast of the 10th day of Tevet. There is the fast of the 17th of Tammuz. Those had to do with moments in which opposing armies, were breaching the walls. They were approaching Jerusalem to destroy it. And so the thought is that, look, were those important moments in Jewish history? Of course. Did they have a lot of negative consequences? Of course. But let's consider that we have, those three minor fasts, which all have to do with events leading up to the destruction of the temple. And then we have Tisha B'Av, which is a major fast, having to do with numerous things, but most prominently destructions of both temples in Jerusalem. Was the destruction of the temple, especially the destruction of the second temple, a paradigm shift in Jewish history? Absolutely. And I know we're less than 100 years removed from the Holocaust, but was that a paradigm shift? Was that a major turning point in Jewish history? Look, obviously not knowing the future, but I would argue, yeah. I mean, was it the most horrendous calamity in Jewish history? I think so. I mean, was the destruction of the temple and the displacement of our ancestors a major event? Of course. And so I don't want this to be about, too much about recency bias, right? To basically say that, we all have this. We have recency bias where, something that has happened very recently feels like, oh my gosh, this is the most important, wonderful, terrible thing, like we tend to engage in that. But I think but in terms of saying that the Holocaust was a big deal, and I know you're not saying that the Holocaust wasn't a big deal. I know you're not saying that. Of course
No,
not.
it just seemed odd to me to be fasting because it happened. I guess in general, I don't really understand the logic of fasting because of a terrible thing that happened.
Okay.
It just seems sort of counterintuitive to me.
Well, to add to that, this may be my lack of knowledge, but there's no fasting involved with mourning, which is that's more comparable to mourning, isn't it?
I hear that. Yeah. And right. I mean, certainly,
That's true.
what's the first thing we do when we get home from the cemetery? We specifically have a meal, right?
Yeah.
And so I think, and and listen, I would say, to be fair, the fact that I have at times considered, and a couple times actually fasted on Holocaust Remembrance Day,
Sure.
has so for me, I would say it's much more an emotional reaction as opposed to a logical one per se. The part of the idea is that is just knowing that, look, obviously victims of the Holocaust suffered every kind of indignity and every kind of suffering that you could imagine.
And
But
they had no food.
they had no food.
So,
Right. And so,
it's like,
right.
I don't, yeah, I mean,
It's-
I get, all right. I mean, and the state of Israel probably would not have been founded if it had not happened, at least not at that particular time. I have a little trouble with the whole thing. I mean, not just the fasting, just whatever, the Holocaust.
I think that, Janet, the fasting also may be a kind of a sign of solidarity with the victims of the Holocaust.
Okay, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Sure. So again, this is, a challenge we face. And, as we wrap up today, just to think about how do we make ritual meaningful hundreds, sometimes thousands of years after events that obviously shaped us. And, and again, while I don't want to do too much recency bias and just only emphasize what's happened, in relatively recent years, I think it is, nor should we underestimate it, of course. So that's some of my thinking. And so anyway, so I, want to kind of throw that in
I
there.
get it.
So, all right.
I
Well, great.
sort of get it.
Sure. No worries. All right. Well, very good. Well, look, I appreciate it as always, and let's do it again next week. I'll be on Zoom, and we will catch you then, I hope.
Yasher Koach, Rabbi.
Thank you,
Thank
Rabbi.
you. I may be missing a few classes because I'll be cleaning the kitchen. Not sure.
Okay.
The synagogue kitchen, I mean, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And thank you for that. And
We'll see. I'm not sure what Frank's schedule is. I think it's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Just saying,
and we'll be so feel free to watch on YouTube as you need.
Sure.
All right.
Okay.
Take care, everybody.